Well, good afternoon and welcome to my channel. I'm Kip Davis. I'm a scholar of the Hebrew Bible and a specialist in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's Wednesday, the 9th of April at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the Pacific Coast. 4, I think, in New York City. Is that right?
Indeed.
Indeed. So, yes, welcome everyone. I'm excited for today to introduce to you Professor Erin Thompson. Welcome to my channel.
I'm happy to be here. Well, I'm
Awesome.
happy to be in my apartment, but also, with you.
But also
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So, thank you, COVID, for providing us the comfort levels to uh, interact with the world from our apartments. We're forever indebted to you for that. And Vishanti, it's good to see you. How are you today?
Better. Not 100%, but I'm getting there slowly. So that was like
Okay. Well, that's
really poorly last week, but a lot of the
yeah.
congestion is cleared up, so I'm getting there slowly.
That's very good to hear. I'm pleased. I'm sure everyone is happy to hear about that. I was having a pretty good week until late last night when YouTube, in their infinite wisdom, decided that my video interview that Dr. Josh and I conducted with legendary Israeli archaeologist Amahai Mazar is apparently not in keeping with their advertising standards. So even after appeal, after a so-called manual review, and I'm starting to question the value or the process of that, but yeah. So I'm a little surly today, but we press on. This is the world in which we're living, and it's good to see you. Just say hi to a couple people. Good to see Nitty, and Satan 616 is one of my intrepid Hebrew students, uh, tuning in faithfully at 11 o'clock at night in Romania, which is actually probably early for Satan compared to how he has to interact with most of my stuff. So good to see Triceratops, Matthew Dye, and Cheryl Lyle, and Vadim Richenko, who must promise to behave himself today, and Grampong. And I'm also very pleased to see that Unbiblical is starting to pick up some steam. We're going to make this a thing. There were people who were very excited for this stream who were showing up yesterday, like Equus and Prixie Burning Purple and Marcos Malos. It's also good to see Jennifer Silves here. So welcome everyone to the show. What are we doing today? We're talking about one of my favorite things. We're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we're talking about forgeries and art fraud, which is why Professor Erin Thompson is here, because she is currently working on a book project about antiquities fraud, which features a lengthy, riveting, salacious chapter all about the Dead Sea Scrolls forgeries that I had the opportunity to preview. I couldn't put it down. So here we are. So I'm so happy, Erin, that you're here. And yeah, so just welcome. And I'm excited
Yeah.
about
Thank you
this
for the kind
conversation.
words.
Cool. So I thought I'd start off. I'm not very good at this this kind of stuff, so you'll have to bear with me. I thought I'd just provide a formal introduction to you. By the way, everyone, Professor Thompson has a website where you can access her work and her books. I've pinned that the link to that in the chat, so make sure that you flag that and go by and read her books. I have to admit that I have not read anything of yours prior to the draft that you sent, but I'm very interested now in a couple of the titles that you have published. So, but just by way of introduction, Professor Thompson holds a JD from Columbia Law School and a PhD in art history from Columbia University, both in 2010. She also has a certificate in global business law conferred in a joint program with Columbia Law, the Institut d'études politiques in Paris at the Sorbonne. Dr. Thompson is the only professor of art crime in America, which I think is kind of badass. Are there other professors of art crime in places outside of America?
Yes. There's a program in Glasgow and
Oh,
a
wow.
couple elsewhere. Yeah.
That's cool. So do you have like a program at CUNY?
No.
Ah,
People keep asking me, but unfortunately not. But I teach it, and then I work sometimes with authorities, sometimes with countries that are trying to get their things back. Sometimes I'm just a nuisance and a busybody, all on my own.
well, I mean, it's that's at least you've got this. Like I said, it's if I was the only professor of anything, I'd be, you know, I'd put it on a shirt is what I'd do. But that's me. So Dr. Thompson studies the black market for looted antiquities, art forgery, museum theft, the ethics of digital reproductions of cultural heritage, art made by detainees on Guantanamo Bay, which sounds super interesting, and a variety of other overlaps between art and crime. She is the author of Possession, published by Yale in 2016, named by NPR as its best book of the year, and most recently
One of the best books, not
okay. All right.
a best book, not the.
All right. Wow.
Don't want to
Well,
overclaim. I can be the professor, but of art crime, but not
but
the best book
not
writer.
the 2016 recipient of NPR's. And you've done. I've heard you on occasion do some things on NPR as well.
Yep.
Which is cool. Your most recent book, Smashing Statues: The Rise and Fall of America's Public Monuments, was published by Norton in 2022, which traces the turbulent history and abundant ironies of our monuments. Dr. Thompson is currently working on, as I mentioned, a new book on Antiquities Forgeries, which includes this brilliant chapter about the post-2002 Dead Sea Scrolls-like forgeries, and delving into the question, really, and this is what we're here to talk about today, delving into the question of where did these come from, who's behind them. You were kind enough to send me an advance of the chapter. I couldn't put it down, like I said. In terms of your theorizing and going over the documentation and carefully tracking the history in order to identify the forger, I think I'm about 80% convinced. I still have some questions, but it's fantastic. I look forward to seeing it published and to reading the rest of the book. But this is why you're here. Welcome. I keep saying welcome, but I'm very excited. So yeah, it's very cool. Maybe we can start just by if you could give me some background on how one becomes the only professor of art crime in America. Talk to me about art crime, forgeries, antiquities, provenance, these sorts of things, and how they intersect in your work.
Well, the shorter answer is that one wants to become a professor of art history, and then at a certain point thinks, "Oh no, I'm never going to get a job." So I was
Wow.
finishing my dissertation and thinking, "Oh, this is impossible." And so I applied to law school, And I on my application for law school, I wrote, I want to study the looting and smuggling of antiquities, which I had long been interested in. But I thought, yeah, I'm going to end up doing like boring corporate law and going to Italy on my vacation. So this is just a nice story to tell them. But actually, I ended up doing exactly that. So I went to law school.
Awesome.
I worked for a big soulless corporate law firm for just as long as it took to pay off my loans. I was totally
Without
like,
losing your soul.
well, it was only 18 months. I came close.
Oh,
But
well.
I always joke I was spending like a drunken sailor on loan repayments, like advance payments, because it quickly became clear it was not for me. And then I worked for the city of New York, which I actually really loved. But then John Jay College, where I worked, posted a position looking for somebody with a JD and a PhD. And I was like, I guess that's me.
Wow.
And then I've been doing that since 2013, and it's been amazing. And actually, I'm really happy to be working on forgeries right now, because that's how I got into my whole interest in the market for antiquities. My dissertation was on some Greek vases that have scenes that mock or parody gods or heroes.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's like Odysseus quaffing Circe's potion, like a big drunkard, or Zeus running away from a monster, defecating in fear, is how I will say that politely.
Oh my God.
But they're so ridiculous that a lot of earlier scholars had said, well, these must be forgeries, because the Greeks are so dignified they would never pay thieves, which is, not really true of the Greeks. They loved a good poop joke as much as anybody in history. So I thought, wait, but how do you know if something is authentic? If you can, is it just by looking at it or what? And then at first I was very naive, and I thought, oh, well, there must, certainly be all these scientific tests we can use. And then I realized, oh, you can't scientifically date the age of stone. Stone is old in the ground. It's old in a statue. We have no way of telling for sure when something was carved. You can do scientific tests for the age of terracottas, but there's ways to fiddle with those as well. So I thought, okay, well, you'll know it's authentic and antiquity if it comes from an excavation. And then the next time I went to the Metropolitan Museum, I was like, wait, why is there no information about which excavation this came from or that came from? Like, it's hard to imagine myself as so naive once, young, bright-eyed Erin. But I realized that there's this huge market for antiquities. There has been for a long time, and more antiquities keep getting taken out of the ground to satisfy collectors' desires, which is what I wrote my first book about, analyzing what collectors think of their own habits. And so, yeah, I just have kept going. And now, after writing what seemed like a very urgent book about monuments controversies, and was also a very depressing book, I thought, let's do something fun, and started to write about forgery, and then soon found that there are so many scammers and dirtbags and stories that are both good and painful.
Boy, there really are a lot, aren't there? And by the way, that's how I've been advertising and shilling the stream today, because I feel very much like you. Forgeries are fun. It's fun. That's it's when I started to intersect this kind of conversation in my own work, it became difficult to think about or do much of anything else. But I mean, I think you hit on something that's really important, I think, and that's something that in my own work, in my own experience, it was very much a learning experience and just a real learning curve in terms of how these antiquity markets function and how they continue to exist in this black box, I guess, of provenance and provenience and how much of a role that has always played, I think, in just even the marketability of these things. yeah. So one
But
of the
before
things.
you ask,
Yeah,
I want
yeah,
to say, just
yeah.
like forgeries are so fun, but I think they're also so valuable for information about actual antiquity, especially about
Oh
reception
wow, yeah.
history, because they're just like they're the constructed pure form of what people want out of an antiquity in each different period. So it's absolutely great information about why people are looking at the past, what they think about the past, what they believe or wrongly believe about the past. So just got to put in there, like
Yeah,
both
yeah.
fun and
No.
scholarly useful.
No, that's and that actually does lead into quite nicely, like a question that I wanted to ask up front. Oh, but just before we get into that, I'm just going to remind everyone that Professor Thompson has graciously agreed to give me 2 hours. We will be opening up the room for questions. If you have any questions for her, I can answer questions too. Just make sure you get those in, and depending on how many we'll start going through them. But yeah, super chat your questions for priority. Vishanti is going to keep an eye on the chat. So yeah, uh, but I think what you just said there about how these reveal things about antiquities, in particular, the kinds of things that people want to see or think that other people want to see, just raises and this is a question that I continued to ask when I was working on the Dead Sea Scrolls forgeries, is the question of motivation. Right away, the expectation is that this is always just about wanting to make money, an easy way to make money. What are the motivations behind antiquities fraud? Is it just as simple as that? Or, I mean, as someone who spent some time looking on a broader scale, just at the antiquities markets and instances of fraud across a wider spectrum. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I have to say it mostly seems to be money, but there are, of course, different motivations. Alceo Docena was an Italian forger in the 1920s and 30s. His work ended up in many American museums. They paid $200,000 for one of his sculptures at the Cleveland Museum of Art in 1927, which is just an unbelievable record-setting amounts because they thought it was archaic 6th century Greek sculpture, which it was not.
Wow.
He had just made it. But he said, basically, I'm skilled and I can't make a good living being an artist. So I'm just kind of going to show you. His story is super fascinating. I'm writing about him for a chapter in part because he got arrested and went to jail briefly, and then was tried in Italy, not for forgery. You can
Oh,
kind of read between the lines of the court cases and the newspaper stories, being like, "Yeah, Cheo, good job screwing over the Americans." But because he was reported for saying anti-fascist things about Mussolini.
wow.
Yeah. So how could you not love
Interesting.
somebody like
Yeah,
that?
yeah, right.
It's
No,
amazing.
that's
And then Ariel Sabar, this journalist who's written amazing book and amazing articles about antiquities forgers for The Atlantic, and then his book is called Veritas. Uh,
it's a very good book.
so good. Writes about how that forger he thinks was motivated by sort of feeling excluded from the academic world, and then desires to fool academics or a particular academic to get revenge for being excluded and show that he's actually smarter. And then in another Atlantic article, Ariel wrote about a Columbia professor who he thinks forged a secret gospel of Christ in the 1950s, I think. Morton Smith.
Oh
And this
yeah.
gospel purportedly describes Jesus spending the night with a beautiful naked young man. And Morton Smith was closetedly gay, and so Sabar and I think others have argued that this was a way for him to try and make an argument that homosexuality is normal and should not be condemned and looked. Even Jesus did it, maybe. So a huge variety of possible motivations for forgeries and for buying forgeries too.
Did you for your current project, did you do any work or look into Constantine Simonides?
So for my book, what I wanted to do is tell stories that hadn't already been told
Right.
before, or that I could uncover a lot.
Uh-oh. I can't. Is it just me or?
There, sorry.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yeah. So I didn't tell. I'm not telling the stories that have been told before, but I am citing them. So I will cite a lot about him, but I have not included him. But he's a fascinating character.
He is. He's a very fascinating character. For those in the audience who aren't aware, he was a prolific forger from the is it mid or late 19th century? 19th century. We'll just say that. And I continue to be amused just because he claimed, I believe he claimed to have forged the Codex Sinaiticus, which is perhaps one of the most important biblical manuscripts on earth, which I think is fun. And the thing that I'm always really amused by is that King James onlyists continue to this day to build their case for, you know, the King James version on this claim of Constantine Simonides. But yeah, just a brazen guy with some skills too. But
I'm such a goody two shoes. I don't lie. I can't tell people I like their outfit if I don't like their outfit. So I think a big part of my fascination with forgeries is just like, oh, how can they get away with lying? So, and it's not just lying to make a thing. They're often presenting a whole fake history of where they got the thing. And oh, I remember this thing in a box and it was in the back of the store. No, the left-hand side, not the right-hand side. You know, they're just lying up, down, left, and sideways. It's amazing.
I noticed something in the chat that I think might be relevant. Graham Pong says that they're still not convinced that Codex Sinaiticus is legit. What are some of the discussions around that in regards to like how it was found and provenance and how the manuscript was dated and all that?
I'm the wrong person to ask this question, I'm afraid. If only Malcolm Choate or Tommy Wasserman were here to answer that question, and I would defer people or refer people to their work. But I am aware that that this is not a. I mean for almost all scholars, it's a settled issue. In terms of and again, in terms of the authentication process or the reasons why scholars are convinced, I just don't know. I can tell you that one of the reasons, well, I could say this, one of the reasons why it's believed widely that Constantine Simonides's claims were false is because Tischendorf was the scholar who did all the work on this manuscript, first publications. He and made a name for himself with it. And Constantine Simonides hated Tischendorf and had this long-standing rivalry of sorts, and it seems, based on the ways in which Simonides describes the situation, that it was very much for him all about embarrassing Tischendorf as much as possible. So I mean, I remember that much. I'm afraid I don't remember a lot of the other details, but there's lots of information out there about
Well, I mean, just to throw, and not to throw too much shade on your wonderful producer here, but asking, where did the manuscript come from? How is it
yeah,
found? What kind of
right.
text scholar does that? No, no, no. If you're a textual scholar, what you do is like look at each tiny little letter form and
That's right.
vocabulary. You never ask anything about where it came from. What possible information
Yep.
could that be?
Seriously, right? And it feels like this is something that for many in my field is still, the message is still not getting through. I was in 2000, I think it was 2017. I was in a meeting of the SBL as a result of the stuff with the Gospel of Jesus Wife forgery, and then the Dead Sea Scrolls forgeries. The SBL underwent a review of their policy on manuscripts and provenance. They published it with some new revised stricter rules as to what you're even allowed to present or talk about at the meeting, right? And wouldn't you know it, I was in a session on papyrology, and a guy stands up to present a new papyrus that came from God knows where, because but yeah, it's i- it's we're slow at coming around on some of these questions. There's too many letters and words, and they're all really interesting. So um but I think one of the things that I'm particularly interested in these conversations, in particular, is um, in this question of provenance. Maybe you could provide us with a bit of a definition, and help people to understand what we're talking about here. But one of the features, one of the strong points behind uh, provenance claims with regards to manuscripts, particularly manuscripts that appear on antiquities markets, but I think most manuscripts, is these discovery narratives. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about how discovery narratives play into the process of authentication, how they affect it, and ways in which they've been used to forward claims of authentication. Sorry, there's a lot there, but
Yeah, it's all my
yeah, maybe
jam.
just all right.
Okay, definition wise, if we're doing
Mm,
law and order, art crime, or antiquities crime unit, provenance, you can just think of as the chain of ownership history. So who has owned the thing since we've known about it, since it's emerged from the ground, or the cave, or the tomb, or whatever. And that is important for a number of reasons. Authenticity, so you could link that object with other objects from the same place. So you can do reception history of who owned what when, who translated what when. There's all sorts of fascinating reasons, but it's also just important for legality. So most of what we call antiquities source countries, where antiquities come from, have outlawed the unpermitted export of antiquities in the course of the 20th century. You can rule of thumb it by thinking that during the nationalism of World War II, like the countries that hadn't yet done it did it, and said, all right, the past is ours, no more taking it out as much as you want. versus market countries, so countries where a lot of the collecting institution and people are have a more, loosey-goosey approach to export and import of antiquities. But finally, beginning in the 1970s, a lot of even the market countries put rules on themselves. Individual scholarly bodies like the SBA or the American Archaeological Association, blah, 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 American museums began to also restrict themselves and think, okay, if we buy everything we can, it's encouraging the black market because people are going to dig stuff up. They're going to sell it with no provenance because they aren't going to write down, I looted this from a tomb in Saqqara yesterday, please buy it from me. No, so we aren't going to buy stuff without good provenance, which means it left its country of origin, or at least its probable country of origin, either legally or if illegally, before 1970. We'll just draw a little line in the sand there. So still problematic, but and then a huge problem you might also anticipate is what happens when people fake provenance documents, which they do a lot, or they fake a story of where it came from. So you can get very boring forgeries of, here's a receipt from this gallery from 1968, like I've been looking at all day today, or you can get more dramatic stories of like, oh, this was said to have been found by Bedouins in a cave and then sold to a dealer here who flew it to Switzerland there, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of these provenance stories, the false provenances that are covering up for either fake or looted antiquities, seem really detailed, but are actually very hard to verify. You find out that everybody mentioned in them is dead, or just uncontactable. They're often just orally transmitted, like, trust me, versus there's never usually any, photographs of the thing in the place where it's supposed to be, or inventories, or et cetera, et cetera. Things leave records if you want to. And they're often just sort of exciting, and we want to believe them. And we are often tempted as scholars or as people who are just interested in history to also be discoverers. Like, we discovered this thing in an antiquities shop, or we discovered the meaning of this thing that has never been translated before, and now we get to do a kick-ass presentation at SBA on it or whatever.
Wow. Yeah, I'm reminded, Indiana, trust me, bro, Jones.
Exactly.
Pretty much. I'm reminded of this within our field, within my field, and the work on the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's this kind of amazing story that took place just on literally within weeks of the start of the 6-Day War in 1967. Kando Sr. was efforting to sell the Temple Scroll, which was his nest egg. This was the one that he was going to use for his retirement fund, and set himself up for life. So he was putting, quietly putting feelers out to see if he could find a buyer. Frank Moore-Cross, one of the scholars working on the Dead Sea Scrolls, knew about this, as scholars have a tendency to get a hold of this sort of information. He found a wealthy backer by the name of Elizabeth Bechtel, a steel magnate in Pittsburgh, I believe, and raised $1 million in 1967 to purchase the Temple Scroll. And it's just, it's leading up to the 6-Day War, right? So things are tense in Jerusalem, and Kando says, okay, you need to meet me in Beirut, in Lebanon. And Cross tells this story. He was such a brilliant storyteller in the first place, but he tells this amazing story of getting on a plane and landing in Beirut and late at night, and meeting a contact at the hotel who, you know, gave him these very secretly gave him these instructions to, you know, go the next night at 11 o'clock under this bridge, you know, where Kando then pulls up in his own car and gets out and shows him a box full of Dead Sea Scrolls fragments. And Cross is kind of like sorting through this stuff. He wants to buy the temple scroll. So he's looking at these smaller fragments going, well, I mean, it's kind of interesting. I don't remember seeing a lot of these things before, but come on, I'm here to buy the temple scroll. But he tells this story. He actually wrote a letter to Elizabeth Bechtel, detailing the entire incident and the event and expressing this disappointment that all Kando seemed to want to sell him was this box of fragments. And the reason for that is because he had another deal already kind of in place for the temple scroll. He's just being a good businessman, you know, drumming up interest in buying all of his stuff. But you know, this story ends up getting basically marshaled much later on. It pops up again in the I think you mentioned it actually in your chapter. I think you said the first time publicly in publication that you saw the story, I think, was in 2002. Am I getting that right? Or do you remember?
I remember it was used for some of the scrolls that Kondo Jr., right, William Kondo sold
William
the,
Kondo.
yeah, sold to Skoyan, right, in
Yeah.
late
And
90s. Yeah.
and I think, but I think yeah, it's probably hits, you know, publication for the
Mhm.
first time in an interview that Skoyan gave to Herschel Shanks at the Biblical
Mhm.
Archaeology Review in 2002. But this story just kind of takes on a life of its own as it gets told and retold, and you know, I've heard versions of it where, you know, he's not they're not meeting under a bridge, they're meeting in like an old abandoned mansion, you know, somewhere in the city, and it just but this is the kind of thing, right? um Discovery narratives, just so stories about about provenance or the history of these manuscripts, uh, they seem to, um, yeah, they're used, I guess, and contextualized in ways uh, to accompany manuscripts. I wondered if you could, first of all, w- how does one go about, like, it's important to interrogate and to investigate these sorts of stories. As someone with, and this is the thing too. I think one of the things I think I realized as soon as I started reading your chapter, one of the reasons it's so good, I think, is because of your legal background. You've got these very well honed research journalistic skills and access to documents and resources. Uh, what How do you go about interrogating discovery narratives, and why is that so important?
Yeah, great question, because I think that many people can spot the problem with this type of story. It's what I call a cornucopia collection. You know, you can say that endless things have come out of this particular collection. That box of fragments never
Yeah,
empties. You can always claim that
it does
more
it.
were in there because there's no inventory. It's kind of shady. So, of course, there's no documentation of it. And then people like Kondo's son can say, well, I know, trust me because it was my family. What can you know about it? But it's one thing to spot the problem and another thing to think to be able to find out what actually happened.
Yeah.
So you've been saying very flattering things, but I really want to make very clear that I'm standing on the shoulders of research giants, including you and everybody associated with the Lying Pen of Scribes, and a lot of people at the Museum of the Bible, and otherwise associated with the researching the Scoian collection, who have just really spent so much time and effort, years of effort, to try and figure out where these fake fragments came from. And my big contribution, I would say, was to think, why don't I read all of the legal filings, the lawsuits
Yeah.
about involving the people, not just involving the scrolls or the fragments themselves, and there have been lawsuits involving them, but just finding the players and reading all of their lawsuits, because, and not just the decisions, but like all of the filings, because people reveal things that they don't know at the time are going to be damning details later.
Mm.
And then also in lawsuits, people are mad at each other, so they're like laying out each other's dirty laundry as they go. And so I found so many details, not even in the lawsuits directly involving the players, but where like one of them had given a deposition in a IRS tax fraud investigation of an entirely
Oh,
different
wow.
person. So I was really doing that, string diagram in my head for a long time to try and figure out the facts, but you learn a lot that way, I think. And it's something that anybody can do. These are public documents. You can spend a couple of weeks reading about somebody's life if you want.
Wow. Wow. Well, this was honestly one of it was something that I was efforting to do in in 2017, 18, 19. But I just want to say like after reading and reviewing your chapter, I understood right away. I'm like, yeah, there's so much more here that I honestly think you were able to access or tune into, that I just as someone who is much more used to reading and collecting journal articles or early manuscripts than like newspaper articles and legal documents as well. So but maybe the message here is that it takes a village, right?
Definitely.
We're all of us kind of working together. So I one of the things that I'm continually interested in too, and this was always an ongoing issue. I think it continues to be an issue, in particular in my field. As someone who's spent a lot of time looking at forgeries and at art crime and antiquities fraud, um, there's this question about authentication. Um, how do how do manuscripts undergo or artifacts? I guess it's different for everything. But what are some of the ways in which in your experience that you've seen artifacts and manuscripts are authenticated? Are there best practices or widely observed standards? And I'm wondering too, in your experience, like who are the people involved in this kind of process? I've got some thoughts on this too, but my experience is really narrow. But this is one of the things I was really interested in hearing from you about on like a broader scale.
It's so fascinating. And if you want to read more while we're waiting for my book to come out, you can check out a book called The Poet and the Madman, about the Mormon forger who forged a lot of
Oh
documents.
yeah.
So
Okay.
good. And the book is so detailed in how he made them, how they were or were not detected, and how they were sold and appraised, and etc. But there are completely best practices for authentication, for appraisal, but there's a whole lot of shady practices as well, because especially antiquities, whether they're manuscripts or artifacts, are unique objects. So if you are trying to say, is this handbag actually made from the Coach factory, or is it a knockoff? There are ways you can scrutinize it and you can compare it to something exact. You can't do that for an antiquity. If you're trying to sell your beater car, you can look in the valuation, the blue book of how much it should be worth, but you can't do that for an antiquity. And then when we come to biblical antiquities, that's such a smaller slice of the market. There are very fewer people involved in buying these things, which means that for a lot of categories of biblical antiquities, they don't come up for public sale at all. So it's really hard to say, well, this type of Roman head of Hercules in this type of material sold for this much at Christie's and that much at Sotheby's and blah. Like you can assemble a whole bunch of comparatives and price valuations, but for a biblical manuscript that maybe 10 people in the world are really hot to own, you don't do that. If you're a dealer, you go find one of those people and you sell it to them, and then neither you or the dealer or the person who bought it usually brags too much about how much it costs. So, or what sort of process you did to authenticate it. So this is another thing, right? That there are all sorts of scientific tests, of ways to scrutinize, especially manuscripts. A lot of them are written on organic materials you can date. You can chemically analyze the inks. You can scrutinize the text, blah, 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 blah. But you have to ask the question of who wants to hear a no in that circumstance? Who wants to know that it's a fake? The person who owns it doesn't want to hear. The person who is, even in many cases, a museum that is interested in cultivating this donor doesn't really want to break the news. The auction house or the dealer that's selling it doesn't want to hear that it's a fake because they don't make any money that way. So I'm not saying that people lie all the time or that they are deliberately ignorant, but there's all sorts of pressures that to say something is real, to say something is valuable. So it's only very few people who either have no interest or a sort of active joy in saying that something is a forgery.
I was super naive, I think, when I started, working on this question of forgeries and the Dead Sea Scrolls, because this is something I quickly encountered exactly what you're saying, just how difficult it was to convince people to even let you ask some of these questions, right? Just because it's, hey, are you interested in letting me, dramatically devalue your holdings and reduce them to effectively to zero? How does that sound? It's not, it's just not something that that people are keen to do.
Well, and the opposite, because I should mention too that a lot of the reason why you don't hear a lot of scholars, even if they have no financial interest, coming out and saying, well, I think this is a forgery, is that scholars have gotten sued before. Nobody, I mean, not nobody. I would love to be sued because then you can do discovery and find out all sorts of interesting other information. But most people don't like to be sued, so.
Successfully, like, have there been, are there cases where people have, like, scholars have been successfully sued for?
Well, I'm sure in the world somewhere, but in the US, a rash of lawsuits about 15, 20 years ago against authentication boards resulted in a lot of authentication boards just shutting down. So the Warhol Museum, the Basquiat Foundation, called, or they used to, you could send them works and they would give you a yay or a nay. Now they don't at all. They all won those lawsuits, but it cost them so much money to defend themselves that they thought
Wow.
it's just not worth it.
Wow. That's pretty terrible.
Well, and
And
then also I should, one of the most shocking things that I've learned in doing this type of research is that a lot of scholars who you see coming forth and saying, oh, this newly discovered Basquiat or whatever, Michelangelo is totally authentic. They're being paid not just a flat fee, but a percentage of the sales price of the thing. So of course they're going to say, oh my God, I spot a Michelangelo, because they're going to get
yeah,
10%
right.
of a Michelangelo versus 10% of a na 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 na.
Yeah. Wow. That's tragic. One of the problems in my field in particular is the way, and I discovered this pretty well right away as soon as I started working on Scoian's fragments, but just the way in which, and Vish, if you could bring up the video, I pulled up just I wanted to show you this. Maybe you've seen this this lecture by Weston Fields that I gave at the Linear Theological Library. Oh, when was this? 2010, 2011. He's asked this question on authentication, and this was, I think, kind of the bane of our field in terms of just doing the work necessary on the scrolls, and really pave the way for the flood of forgeries onto the markets. But if you could just, and I'd love to get your reaction to this and some of your thoughts. Have you seen this before, by the way?
I watched it when you sent it to me. So
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. All right. So, but I've probably watched it like 50 times, just because the whole thing is loaded with all sorts of interesting reveals. But yeah, let's look at about a minute or two
Authentic?
of
Are there
this.
any counterfeits going around? And how do they know when the scrolls were written?
Okay. Authentic, are there counterfeits, and the date? Okay, well, authentic should be that they come from the time and the place that they claim to come from. I don't think that that's ever been too much of a problem with Dead Sea Scrolls, but there have been attempts at counterfeiting, some from the beginning. I mean, DeVoe talks about this in his introduction to volume 2, I believe it is, in DJD, Discoveries in the Judean Desert, where an Arab had brought him what was obviously a counterfeit. I, at one time, was offered, back in the 90s, I was offered a piece of leather, which had some writing on it, by a Bedouin, and I knew it was fake, but like DeVoe sometimes did, I bought it anyway, because I knew that I would be offered something again, and I wanted at least to be offered. So sometimes there were fakes, not too often. How are things authenticated today? Basically, if the Kondo family says, this comes from K4, that's about the best you can do for provenance. That is where it came from. That's just the way it's been from the beginning. How do we date it? At first, it was paleographically.
Oh, yeah.
That is,
That's
there's a kind of
probably
typology of how.
But the real, I mean, a couple things there, right? Yes, please sell me forgeries or offer me forgeries, because maybe there's something real in there. And then yeah, we've got this one way of deciding whether or not something's authentic, because it or it can be identified by this one person who's
who
not
is
even
the
the
one
guy.
who's not even got,
Yeah,
and who's the one who's making money by selling it to you?
yes.
Of course, the person who wants to make money by selling you something is going to say, don't worry, this thing is authentic. They're not disinterested.
But it's honestly, it's alarming in retrospect now when I think about it, how much this got repeated in circles, like in academic circles, with regards to the manuscripts and the fragments. This got written up in textbooks. You know, we know they were authentic because, you know, all this stuff came from the Candle family. It just it's alarming at how much this can actually intersect with like scholarship.
Well, I
Scholars,
think that what's really happening there is it has a lot to do with the we trust the Kondo family, but I think what's really the core belief is something he says earlier, which is that, well, I know it's a forgery when I'm offered something.
right.
Like, the rest of
Yes.
y'all might be idiots, but I know. So you see this all of the time, that scholars, well, that anybody, you trust yourself. So you think if you make up your own mind, you know, it strikes you as right, it's very difficult to change your own mind. People don't like to feel cognitive dissonance. And people like to, it's sort of psychological, the way our brains work to trust. If we didn't trust anything, we'd be cowering alone, starving to death in a hole. So we tend to trust things that other people say, and only once we have reason to doubt them do we then doubt what they say. But that means that in biblical studies, in antiquities, in art as a whole, the usual starting point when you see something is, oh, this is by the artist from the time period that it's being sold as, and I'll only investigate more if I spot reason to doubt. You know, if this Jackson Pollock has a sticker in the back that says Target $9.99 special or something. But scholars like Oscar Moscarella, this fantastic forgery buster from the Metropolitan Museum, have said, no, 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 what we really need to do is assume that everything that doesn't have good independent documentation is a forgery, and then prove that it's genuine if you want to look at it. And that seems to me like a pretty good way to go about it.
I've been accused of being just far too skeptical by taking such an approach. To the point where sometimes it's almost like I have, you know, second guessed some of my own motivations, right, in this process. But it's a real problem. I don't know what to do about that, but let's talk. Let's talk about your current project. This book that you're writing on antiquities frauds. If you could just tell us in broad strokes about what it is that you're currently working on.
So I have a bunch of stories that I found. So thank you for complimenting me on my ability to dig, and also my ability to put things into stories, because I realized I couldn't just, you know, spend days down a rabbit hole and then emerge with a metatarsal of a rabbit and say, look, you know, you gotta help people see the whole rabbit. So I'm talking about the relationship between looting and forgery by telling the story of the devastation of a particular like whole culture of the Luristan Bronze Age objects in Iran, which were heavily looted in the 30s. I'm talking about an entire fake museum. So it's the California Museum of Ancient Art, which has a collection of real antiquities, but in a storeroom because it's a fake museum. It's a totally tax scam. It's amazing.
Oh wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's so fun. I'm telling the story of to talk about like the lower end of fake antiquities, things that people pay just a couple $100 for, or maybe a couple thousand. The story of the Sadig Gallery, which was for 40 years in a Manhattan showroom until its owner was busted by the Manhattan DA's office and confessed that he had sold nothing but fakes for 4 decades, making millions of dollars.
Wow.
Yes. And then looking conversely at the sort of scientific detection of high-end fakes. So things that sell for millions of dollars and have been very carefully prepared, but not carefully enough. I see a question. So I still have to finish writing it. I have 2 more chapters left to go. I don't even know the title yet, but it will come out with Norton hopefully next year. And they've made an audio version of my last book, so hopefully this one will too.
So yeah, it's still a ways out, and we talked a little bit about this beforehand. The chapter, I assume not all the chapters are quite that big,
No,
are
this
they?
is a monster chapter. I gotta cut it down, but it's just so fun.
I got 82 pages, and I think was it 370 footnotes?
I recently counted. The text is 1,500 words long, or no, 15,000 words long, and the footnotes are 35,000 words long. So sometimes there's just like an entire article's worth of information in a footnote. I think I have one that's 7,000 words long. So some of those will go. You very kindly indulged me by reading the director's cut version.
Oh, seriously, I mean it when I said I found it riveting. In large part, not just because you begin the chapter by drawing attention to my Batcat T-shirt, which I wore for you
which
today,
I saw. I appreciate, noted and appreciated.
But then just raising the question of figuring out who did it, who done it, who is the forger.
What I did, because I thought, you know what, maybe I won't figure out who did it, but by looking into these transactions, I can explain more about the shady side of the antiquities market, how things are bought and sold, because so many people ended up suing each other. And as I said, everybody's dirty laundry gets aired in court documents, especially because multiple participants declared bankruptcy. So, you find out so much about, who owes who to what custom shirt making tailor, for example, in their bankruptcy filings. So I figured, look, to identify a forger, what you want to do is look for people who had early control of the objects in question. And it's very nice that there's so many of these fragments, because you can really, spot chunks of them, not just people who had worked too. And people who profited disproportionately from their sale, right? If you're a forger, you're making your own supply. You don't have to buy it from somebody else. And so I identified the people who were involved in the first couple months worth of sales, because these appear only in late 2002. And besides William Kondo, who's the claimed source, and indeed was selling some of them, there are 3 American dealers. Lee Biondi, a rare books and manuscripts, at that time gallerist, now he's more of an appraiser. Craig Lamp, the owner of both a church and a by rare biblical artifacts
in the
dealership, in a hotel lobby.
Yes.
In a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona. And Bruce Farini, who is another rare books and manuscripts dealer in Akron, Ohio. And particularly because Farini was sued by many people, I found out a lot about all of their interactions. So they all claimed to have bought fragments of these, what turned out to be forgeries early on. In revolving combinations, they banded together to hold the exhibitions in the US of these fragments that traveled around. I got to read a lot of very fun newspaper articles describing those. My favorite was when somebody profiled a woman who'd shown up dressed in period appropriate costume from her church's Easter Passion play and was weeping to look at these scrolls. And I found certainly a lot of fraud going on among all of these people. I would just say, sorry, listeners, I'm not going to tell you who I think it is. You got to wait for my book for that. Also, because I need to say this in a way that has all of those footnotes and not in a just way that will get me sued for slander by people. But I can tell you some of the stories of fraud I found out because they are so deliciously awful. I don't know. Do you have a favorite one that you remember that we could talk about, or should I just pick? They're all my
No,
babies, all the frauds.
yeah, right. No, I mean, I think maybe just one of my favorite. I mean, there's a couple. I have a couple of favorite subplots in this story, and that's probably has to do a lot with my own proximity to it. But it was, when we asked Martin Scoyen to write an appreciation of the fragments for the beginning of the book. I remember in the first place how difficult that was, just because how reluctant he was to talk about it, right? And then and it was a long process, and I was tasked with like basically being his editor, cleaning up the English and stuff. So I had ample time to and pretty much memorize the whole thing after a little while. But it was always so striking to me how he began this this little chapter that he wrote in our book, which is this one here. He starts by paying a visit. He kind of describes it like a pilgrimage, right, to Kando's shop while Kando is still alive. So back in 1993, I believe it was, and he says that he asked him if he could perhaps purchase a Dead Sea Scrolls fragment, and the way he says it, he says that Kando was in sitting in a chair. I pictured a rocking chair kind of rocking back and forth, and he says he gruffly responded to him, "Those days are gone," right? And then he proceeds in his story to talk about some other things he bought before the markets open in 2002. But it's just one of those things that's stuck in my craw. I think for the longest time I was like, how does this make any sense? That and now we have it in publication too. Like I was it just the man who held the Temple Scroll and the Psalm Scroll, and through whose hands passed all this material, when approached about with this question, just shuts it down and says, yeah, it's over in 1993. And lo and behold, there's hundreds of fragments on the market. Maybe not hundreds, but certainly dozens of fragments, well over 100 fragments on the market within the next 15 years. It was kind of one of those moments, right? For me, it was like an aha moment. And how does nobody take this question more seriously? I don't know. So yeah,
fragments being sold by his son, who's just like, what, JK? My father was not telling the truth.
Oh, here they are.
Yeah, I didn't look at that drawer to find these, 150 fragments.
Yeah. And then I think the other one is the story about Lee Biondi and Farini at the art fair in Maastricht, and I think this is 2001 or 2002, I believe.
2002. Or no,
yeah.
2003, early in 2003,
Right.
March 2003 is when
there's
the fragments make their debut.
Yeah. But they were waiting, right, for a package from Kando, to send them this package with fragments in them that they've already agreed to buy and resell for him at the art fair. So they're in Switzerland. They're waiting for this package, and it's late in coming. And when it actually arrives, Farini, I believe, is the one who notices right off the bat, and I think it's probably because Biondi at this point is not that experienced with
Right.
dealing with antiquities, right? But Farini notices and is alarmed, rightly so, that it's been posted from Jerusalem, which is, you know, kind of problematic if these are coming out of Switzerland, because this is all part of the provenance narrative. These fragments have all been out of the country since 1967 at that's kind of the breaking point, right? And they've been in first Lebanon, then Switzerland this entire time. Why are we getting a package full of fragments from Jerusalem? That seems weird and potentially, you know, illegal. So and there's one other part of that story though too that just made me chuckle, where Biondi gave an interview in it might have been in the same article that I read this one in. I don't know if I'm sure you read it, but my favorite part of the article is him describing how when he finally got his hands on the fragments, he took them up to his hotel room, and then he put them on the bed. And then the next thing he says is he had an inspirational night alone with the fragments.
Praying.
And
Come on.
I have a very active imagination, Erin. Yeah, well, I don't know, what can I say? So
Well,
yeah,
okay, I gotta push back on the veracity of this story of
okay,
the
all
master
right.
shipment. This is a bad influence. I left this part out of even the footnotes because I thought I don't need this intense of questioning. But I noted that this story, the story that Farini gets a package FedEx shipment from Kondo, he's shipped the fragments to the art fair straight from Jerusalem when he said he was going to ship them from Switzerland. That story is placed by Farini himself through his associate Michel Van Rijn, who places it with a journalist who writes the story, and then Van Rijn publicizes the story. The story also reveals that this publication reveals that Farini has told this all to the Jerusalem police, the Israeli National Police, as they're investigating the fragments. And he's revealed that he never owned those fragments. He was just, they're on consignment from Kondo. They didn't belong to him. And that, who did buy them are X and Y Americans. And he tells the Israelis exactly where to find them. But at the point where he plants this story, Farini is suing and being sued by X and Y, who are business partners that he owes millions of dollars to. And they did not buy the fragments at that time. They bought them many years later directly from Kondo. And I also noted that these articles mentioned the name of the investigator that Farini was reporting to, who happened to be an investigator not for the Antiquities smuggling part of the Israeli National Police, but for the fraud division. He investigates fake antiquities. So in my construction of what happened, and I'm still trying to figure this out, is that Farini was trying to throw his former investors under the bus to relieve himself from being suspected of dealing in forgeries. And since there weren't very many good records, he could just be like, oh yeah, it was these fragments that these people happen to have that we sent there. I went so far as to order the catalog from that particular art fair.
From the exhibit.
From the TFAF, yeah.
Wow.
To see the advertisements that Farini and Biondi had run, which included that big Paleolithic piece, but no other scribes or scrolls. So we don't actually know.
Right.
We just sort of have to take their word for what fragments were there. And Farini did publish this or give to Ben Ryan to give to the journalists this FedEx label, which is seems to be, you know, it's Condo sending something for Duluth, but it doesn't list the contents or anything. It's just
No.
like the front of the package. So it could have been anything. But who knows? Maybe somebody will come forward. I'm still trying to track down this investigator who's now retired and who actually adjuncted a couple of classes at my college, but he's not responding to my emails to that account. So I still have to persuade him to talk about it.
Wow. I hope that comes to fruition. I hope that happens for you. I don't know. Well, what are some of your favorite stories?
I'm always intrigued by the elasticity of value in these artifacts. So, and the way that elasticity interacts with tax shenanigans. So, for example, Craig Lamp seems to have made a lot of his money by running just a flat out tax fraud, where he would say to customers, oh, look, you've been buying, you know, expensive historical Renaissance era, whatever, early translations of the Bible, early printings of the Bible for me. What you should do is donate a bunch of money to my church. So we had this church called Pilgrim Walk in Phoenix. So say they would donate $1 million to a church, and then his business would, in appreciation, gift a Bible worth $1 million or a couple of manuscripts to the donor. And then also Lamp would connect that donor, the recipient of the gift, with an appraiser who would appraise it for 2 or 3 times what they had the value of the money they had just given. And then they could, if they wanted to, take yet another tax deduction to donate that Bible or whatever to some nonprofit at that additionally inflated valuation, and then take another, you know, a tax deduction for the first donation to the church, and then a tax deduction. So maybe like you would give $1 million and get $4 million worth of tax deductions, which if you're making a lot of money could be worth, you know, $2 million. So pretty good for all concerned. And then because the mission of Lamp's church was educating people about biblical history, he would pay himself and other family members to give like seminars about biblical history. So just, you know, hints and tips.
Wow.
Anybody looking for an alt-act fraud career in biblical education, you could, please don't do it this way. The IRS is like, what are you doing? But some of those same appraisers who are working for that, I'm not saying they knew about it, but they certainly were willing to appraise things for a much higher value than they had just been sold for. Then went on to work for the Museum of the Bible, for the Green family.
Boy.
Well, not work for the Museum of the Bible, work for the Greens when they're donating to the Museum of the Bible.
Would that be Scott Carroll?
But of course.
Well, maybe let's so there's and just to kind of there's probably we should probably provide a little bit more context to the audience. I'm sorry, I'm bad at this. I feel like I'm talking to like an old friend or a colleague. But maybe I should give some context into who some of these people are and what's going on. So William Kando is the son of Iskandar Shahin, who's more commonly known as Kando, who was the antiquities dealer in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, who handled all the sales of the Dead Sea Scrolls from the Bedouin to the École Biblique and the scholars who were working on the material. So he continues to run his father's antiquities business, and some of these other characters, Lee Biondi, you've mentioned, he's in is it Santa Barbara, California, I think.
I forget, but California.
Yeah, he's in California, and I think he was just a book dealer, right? For most of his career.
Was working as an employee and then as a manager of a rare books big dealership, and then he put out his own shingle, and
Yeah.
then closed his gallery to go on the road with these Dead Sea Scroll exhibitions. And after that all went down in flames, has worked as sort of a private dealer and an appraiser, I would say.
And who was sued by Azusa Pacific University for fraud, right? For selling them forgeries. I believe, and I think you said that we can reveal this much today. You said there's a statement from APU's general counsel on the resolution of the lawsuit about its fragments. By the way, I was trying to get a sit-down interview with Biondi for many months, a long time ago, and I couldn't get past his lawyer. And then a few weeks after, the frustration of not being able to get past his lawyer, they subpoenaed me to they wanted all of my correspondences, texts and emails, to anyone dealing with anything concerning Dead Sea Scrolls. I think the dates were like 2010 to 2000. When was that? At that point, that was like 2019, right? And I was just like, no. So anyways, APU sued Biondi over COVID. Not
Right. So
because of
APU, by the way,
COVID.
is one of the three main US institutions that ended up with a chunk of
Right.
these Dead Sea Scroll
Thank you
forgeries.
for that.
So
That's Azusa Pacific University.
Yeah. So after the Museum of the Bible announced, like, ours are not so great, then APU tried to get its money back from Biondi, who sold some fragments to them directly, and also sort of facilitated the sale from a Christian nonprofit to them as well. And then they sued. The suit went on for a couple of years. There's some fun documents filed, and then, as is incredibly frustratingly often the case in lawsuits, there's a document. The last one filed in the case just said the party settled, bye, and they don't tell you what the settlement was. So I was asking a bunch of people, and then there were people who told me, but you can't, like, this is off the record. Like, so I did the thing
Very
journalists sometimes do, of like, I know what the case is, but to say it to anybody else, I need to get confirmation. So fortunately, when I contacted APU, the general counsel came back to say that the case was resolved by settlement, where the purchase was rescinded, more or less. So they got their money back. The fragments are now were given back to Biondi and this Christian nonprofit. So and Biondi apparently still believes full-throatedly that they're genuine. So maybe he'll convince somebody else to buy them. Who knows?
Of course, yes. And I wouldn't be surprised if he found another buyer for them at some point. But wow, that's a nice resolution, I think. And I didn't even have to dig through my emails. So and I honestly don't know how it would have helped him either. It was very strange to me. But
it would have really amused some poor junior associate tasked with doing research on all of your emails. Like, they would have gotten basically a master's in biblical studies from reading all of that.
Probably. And Biondi was partnered, right, with both Farini and Craig Lamp in 2002.
I mean, it depends what you mean by partners, because they were happily cheating each other. Not all of them. Biondi was more cheated upon in a lot of these things. Wow. I think he had to declare bankruptcy in the middle of these exhibitions because they weren't paying him the money that they had promised. In part, it's also fascinating because we think of these fake fragments as making a bunch of money, but they didn't make a bunch of money until more than 5 years after they first appeared.
Oh,
So
wow.
it would be much easier to spot who has unexpectedly made a bunch of money in the first year, but no, it's only once they've sort of disseminated out do they start to become hot on the market. But during these exhibitions, because the fragments aren't selling, the partners start to find other ways to make money from the exhibitions, so to speak. And then there's lots more lawsuits over that with a lot of fascinating documents.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask about. I mean, those were kind of a couple of the others, and maybe we can. You spend a lot of time talking about this very interesting character in your book as well, Michel Van Rijn. Maybe can you tell us a little bit about who this guy is? And then also maybe a little bit about how he connects to the story without giving too much of the farm away.
Sure. You're gonna have to stop me because I can talk forever about this guy. So he is a larger than life art dealer and dabbler in forgery, and but more he likes the smuggling. So he sells stuff that has been smuggled from a lot of Byzantine and icons. More is his area, early medieval, but he won't turn up his nose at some ancient Greek and Roman stuff if he can get it. So he makes all these connections in the shady side of the art trade, and then gets caught one too many times and declares that he's turned over a new leaf, that he'll help the authorities to recover artworks, and that he starts a website where he's posting all this information about shady antiquities deals and calling out people and dealers and blah, 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 blah. And I'd been very interested in him for years, but was unsure about how far to trust him, because it just didn't seem right.
Did
He would often post about, I'm going to reveal this story, and then nothing would actually appear.
Yeah. Just
So
curious, did that interest, did that like even before looking into this story of the scrolls forgeries, he's been kind of on your radar for a long time.
yes, it is both the blessing and the
Wow.
curse of this book that everybody in the illicit antiquities world knows each other. So everybody that I've been sort of semi-tracking for years and now get to do the deep dive and figure out like, oh, they lived together, they partnered together, they
Mm,
cheated each other, whatever. But it's also kind of just insanely hard to divide this book into chapters because I'll be like, no, 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 you belong in this chapter.
yeah.
Stop popping up over here. So we'll see how much I manage to do it. But Van Rijn appears in a couple of chapters. And he
Wow.
turns out that he's basically, I think, I know people disagree, but he's strategically, let's say, releasing information. And if people pay him not to do it, he won't post the information. Some people pay him to post the information. So he posts a lot about the Dead Sea Scrolls transactions, because one of the parties to them is feeding him information in a really not so subtle a way to cover their own tracks, I think. So there's a lot of
Wow.
dissecting his posts chapter.
Wow. Fascinating. And there's I mean, if people are interested, there's a pretty famous article that was written a long time ago now, I think, like maybe, is it 10 years ago, about him as sort of as this art fraud buster, informant working for Scotland Yard, I think it was. Was that in the Atlantic? I don't remember. I'm not sure if
I
you
think
do, but
there's a long form one in the art newspaper, which
right.
has a lot to do with the Gospel of Judas, because he was also uh,
Yes.
hired by many sides of that dispute, actually, to
Wow.
when they're fighting over who owned that manuscript. And by they, I mean the European dealer who bought it from the Egyptian dealer and consigned it to an American dealer who then had no intention of paying her, and then they were fighting back and forth about
Yeah.
who could reclaim it. So each side worked with Ryan to post information, flagging on the other side, and it's so fun.
Yeah. A man's got to make a living, and it sounds like he's figured out a way to do that. I guess you could say. Another interesting figure in some of this is this guy Scott Carroll at the Museum of the Bible. I know of him through this connection. He was hired as the first curator and purchaser dealer, I guess, of putting together this collection. I actually worked when I was last at when I last worked at Trinity Western. There's a guy on faculty at one of the seminaries there by the name of Rob Hebert. He's a Septuagint scholar, really good guy, but he used to tell me stories all the time about because apparently before coming to Trinity, he used to actually work at the Bible Land exhibit that was put on by what's the name of the family?
Forget.
I am forget it's a Dutch family collection. That actually ended up, I think most of it ended up, or a lot of it ended up at the Museum of the Bible. Anyways, that's the thing with a lot of this stuff is it just sort of rotates around, right? But he used to work with Scott Carroll, who put together, that collection, this famous family collection of biblical artifacts that they put on display at the amusement park, Bible Land. It's all as ridiculous as it sounds, but and he ended up moving on to work for the Green family, the who were the primary donors, I guess you could say, of the Museum of the Bible, basically the people behind the Museum of the Bible. When I was starting, he was just on his way out, rather unceremoniously. But yeah, sort of an interesting character. I think I had actually mentioned maybe on one of my last 2 live streams that lots of these guys who like to traffic in, I guess, the veneer of being an antiquity specialist seem to have this special affinity for Indiana Jones, which is all sorts of interesting on many levels. I know one of the things that I remember in particular about Scott Carroll is that he had, of course, the Raiders of the Lost Ark theme as his ringtone on his phone, and he used to, when he would go and give talks at places, they would introduce him as a real life Indiana Jones. Had the hat and everything, but yeah.
So many of these dudes have the hat. It's bizarre.
I know, right? Like, what's that about? So, well, I think I get it, but it's amusing. How anything? Do you have anything to add or to throw in on how he fits into this this story? His involvement is a little bit bigger, I think, than or more widespread than just the scrolls forgeries, for sure.
Right, and I don't think he ever really had much to do with the scroll forgeries.
We should be clear about that. Yeah.
But he was appraising things, and this is again, like I said at the beginning, and forgeries are such a great way of studying antiquities because you learn about what people want, but you also learn how the market works. Because when people start worrying about forgeries, almost always somebody's going to be like, let me break it down for you. This isn't fake because like it was smuggled exactly from here, or this was the fraudulent appraisal process. Like people just tell you a lot of stuff to defend against the accusations of forgery. So you learn so much. So I learned a lot more about Scott Carroll because he was involved in a case, one of the clients of Craig Lamp, where he was working to appraise these, appreciation gifts
Mhm.
and other things. And he, at this point, saw nothing wrong with what he was doing. So he just sort of lays out exactly like, yeah, I go and I get a Torah scroll from
Nope.
some dealer in Europe or in Israel, and they only charge me, $10,000. But then I think it's worth, $50,000 or $100,000 or something like that. And so I could really help my clients, maximize their tax,
Their tax dollars.
whatever. So he's
Yeah.
very clear that the benefit of these biblical collectibles, more or less, is that nobody really knows how much they're worth. So you can
Right.
judge the value very easily.
That's true. That's very true. I think
I'd like to do some Q&A and super chats.
let's do some Q&A. Just before we get to those, I just wanted to say I am very excited about the book, and I hope everyone does check it out when it's published. And I think we should have you back when it is published.
Oh yeah.
So we could actually talk about who the forger is. I know I was very bad and teased everyone with my clickbaity title and thumbnail, but you're just gonna have to come back. So yeah, let's look at some questions and some super chats.
And if you know any relevant
yeah.
information, I'm very available for continuing to collect information.
Perfect. Yeah, get on it,
All
audience.
right, Vadim for €2. Doc Toke, why aren't you wearing a toque?
Because I was going to say because it's warm today, but it's actually not that much. When I went to walk the dogs today, my ears were actually hurting because it was pretty chilly out there. But I have no excuse with them. Yeah. Sorry.
This is from way earlier, but I saw Westhoff measure the space between the letters is definitely legit. Talking about his reproductions of
yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Question for Professor Erin: what is the most ridiculous fraud people got away with? Which also happens to correspond to another chat that somebody was asking. So
how spicy?
People have, then you just kind of have already mentioned this.
Spicy.
But if you got something more spicy, let's hear it.
Let's have it.
So the thing that really kicked off writing this book, I've been interested in Antiquities, fraud, forgeries forever, but the thing where I was like, okay, I gotta write this book, is that the Sade Gallery guy that I was telling you about that got was found guilty, pled guilty to faking. When I had gone onto his website years before to look at what he was offering, the thing that stood out to me, so to speak, was a Egyptian body part, which was a fully erect penis wrapped in bandages, like a mummified erection. And I thought, either I fundamentally misunderstand something about erections or about mummification, because you have to drain the blood. And he was charging $15,000 for this. And I tracked down one of his former employees who told me that people actually bought a few of these things, and that she figured out, because he wasn't, he didn't let her on all his secrets, so she had to figure out around the edges, which she did by sticking a pin into things like this and hearing them squeak. And that was the sound of styrofoam. So he was just carving these things out of styrofoam and then wrapping them. He was too cheap to buy linen, so he just wrapped them in like ace bandages, surgical bandages.
Oh my God.
Stayed them with dirt. So really low effort, pretty high reward for
wow.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the big lessons here. I think for me, in retrospect too, is that very often these things don't even have to be all that convincing.
Because people
I
want to
did.
believe. Yeah.
People want to believe. And I thought I just throw this in there from my friend Simone, and I'm kind of agreeing with you here. The Hudson Gabriel, which is not. I mean, I think it's a fake. I know a lot of people think it's fake. There's open question about this, but I'm with you, Simone. The Gabriel stone is pretty silly, but that's yep.
All right. This is about the Qumran sect. Specific 1QS CD arguments for and against Nicene identity. More question marks. 1Q Isaiah A. All of this, they're asking about dating differences. So I'm assuming, Kip, that's
Boy.
a little more in your wheelhouse.
There's a lot. I mean, there's a whole bunch there.
That's a lot going on.
Yeah. It's 1QS CD arguments for against the scene identity. 1QS Habakkuk script. Keep paragraph. Oh boy. Can I don't know if I have the time to go through all of this here and now, because we got a bunch of other questions that we have to get through. So make the myth, ask this question again in a future stream, and I'll make sure to get to it and to answer it. But I just don't think I can take the time to do it right now.
Clifton
sorry.
Lee, new member.
Yay!
Hooray!
Welcome, Clifton Lee.
Chuck, for 20, what was the toughest or most intriguing forgery you've ever studied or cracked? This one you did actually answer like right after he super chatted it, so I don't know if you saw it in the chat, but you had already mentioned that. But I promised that since he paid for it, I would read it.
I mean, again, they're all my babies. And it's so fun because this book, I'm figuring out so many different ways of asking or figuring out forgeries. So sometimes it's lawsuits, sometimes it's you finding out who can I ask that was related to the time. I am realizing that there are two types of people when you ask them about, sort of intense periods of their history where they were working for somebody shady or representing them if they're a lawyer. And some people are like, how dare you even contact me? And then other people are like, they react like they've been waiting by the phone for your call. Like,
yeah.
I want to tell you everything. So it can't hurt to ask. Even though as a good millennial, I hate talking on the phone. It's still totally worth it. And I think my favorite so far is the Dosena chapter. I thought I wasn't going to write about him because his story's been written about before, but thanks to social media, a professor at an institution in Germany is like, oh, I think we have some archival documents about him, maybe one or two letters. And I went because I was going to be near there to go to a conference, and it turns out that they had hundreds of letters from his dealers and all of these scholars arguing about whether his objects were real or not. So it only took like weeks and weeks and weeks of trying to transcribe cramped 1920s German handwriting and then translate it. But I think I get to tell that whole story. So, and then this morning I spent looking at Uniform Commercial Code filings of lien collateral. So all sorts of ways to crack a forgery. If you ask the question of where did this come from, it turns out there's a lot of ways to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Okay. Joshua owns for 2. What's your take on Oded Golan, the pomegranate?
And I really like Nina Burleigh's book, Unholy Business, where she does the same thing. She goes and talks to the people involved. So I'm recommending that in my book, and I'll recommend it to you. Like, I think what she thinks, which is that everything is highly suspicious.
I agree.
Yeah.
I thought she made a very compelling case about Oded Golan's work. So, but yeah. Thank you for the question, Joshua Owens.
Okay. Cliff Lee for 10. I was lead researcher at Nat Geo with Gospel of Judas. I just missed the conversation because of a phone call, but oh my God, Verini and Van Reen, I was going to ask whatever happened to Van Reen.
Okay, Clifton, please send me an email. I would love to talk to you.
Right.
Right.
Van Ryan died in 2024. So sadly, just after I thought I really should talk to him. But yes, the Gospel of Judas plays way into this in ways into the Dead Sea Scroll forgeries in ways that I was not anticipating. Among the most
Right. Yeah.
delicious of which, maybe for the Gospel of Judas fans, is that Farini kept some of the pages. He was supposed to give Frida Chekos, the Swiss dealer, back all of the manuscript, but he just kept some of it, displayed those pages in his exhibitions alongside the fake Dead Sea Scroll fragments, and then spent years evading her lawyer's attempts to reclaim them after he declared bankruptcy. Finally gave in, showed up to a deposition with just folders full of her fragments from the Gospel of Judas and other manuscripts, and handed them over. And then, because her lawyers did the right thing and notified US Customs that they are flying with these antiquities, at the Cleveland airport, customs agents seized all of the fragments from Jacos's lawyer. So instead of going back to her, they were repatriated directly to Egypt.
Wow.
Imagine borrowing stuff and then just not giving it back. And I'm going to just go the full way and like display them. That's bold.
Well, I mean, Farini was so maddening in many ways. What he also did during his bankruptcy is he was supposed to turn over all of his inventory, so it'd be sold for his creditors. But in the case of a couple of Egyptian Books of the Dead big fragments, he just cut them in half, gave half to the bank because they were listed on his inventory, but they didn't say how much of it, just some Book of the Dead. So he gave half, and then he had his girlfriend sell on her eBay account the other half, not even as a half, but to make more money and to disguise what he was doing. He cut those into smaller fragments. So these little tiny pieces. Not good. Don't do that, people.
No. Wow.
Yeah. So, by the way, this is my new favorite story for telling people who are like, well, we wouldn't have these manuscripts if not for the illicit market.
Oh my God. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you very much, Clifton. And yes, please make sure you email Dr. Thompson.
All right. I'm finished journeying for 666. Hail Nero, Kip, and Erin, an Antiquities dealers with credentials of T-Dog's economic advisor.
Pretty good.
Timely U.S. politics joke. Haha, I'm actually crying on the inside.
Yeah.
Maybe on the outside, too. I love being a millennial and living through my, fifth crisis. That's great. It feels wonderful. I love this for me. Love this for me personally. Okay, Lixletta, any thoughts on why Dirk Obink hasn't done hard time for alleged multi-million-dollar conversion theft or fraud?
It freaking beats me. The wheels of justice run slowly in the UK for these type of cases, so it might still be coming. It's apparently still an ongoing case, but I don't know. He was sued in America by the Museum of the Bible, and they won a default judgment because he never even responded. So he's still apparently living in Oxford. Ben Lewis collaborated with Roberta Mazza to do a podcast on the BBC, which I just finished listening to on the Museum of the Bible. And he did a door knock of
really?
Obink. Yes, who did not say anything, but was spotted in the flesh.
Okay.
Wow.
All right.
So which podcast is that?
Here, let me give you.
Or if you could even, just send me the link. I'd appreciate that. Big fan of Roberta's. So she's actually the first person who told me when I met her the first time and I told her that I was working for the Museum of the Bible. She just said to me, she goes, "Just stop. Just just get out." But
Run! Yeah. All right. Weird DNA is asking, what would you like to find out about the Dead Sea Scrolls that would answer some of your questions that haven't been answered so far?
yeah, so I think I can do this relatively quickly, and it right now it's probably just the current or the last project that I was working on with in terms of scribal practices and materiality in the manuscripts and how much they can tell us about the shape of so-called scripture in early Judaism and the ways in which these texts were important or functional for people, not just in the Qumran community, but I think more broadly in Jewish communities. I think it's it's really interesting because I think there's a lot there to be revealed about texts that people don't necessarily expect, that can surprise us. I did a little bit for a year or two on the connection between the materiality of some of the Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts and magic or apotropaic functions, which is something that I think needs to be explored a little bit more carefully. But these are the sorts of questions that I'm kind of interested in. But thanks for
Since
the
Ledge's
question.
ears are perking up.
Yeah, right. I'm interviewing with him tomorrow, so maybe that'll come up.
So
But
excited.
yeah. So, but I think that's it, isn't it? Is that all we got?
Yeah, that's all
Uh,
the super chats, and it looks like
uh,
those are all the really burning questions that the chat had
Cool.
so far, unless I missed one.
The podcast is called Word of God, FYI.
Word of God.
Yes. BBC podcast.
Cool. Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna go listen to that after this. I didn't get a chance to tell. I know I don't have nearly as much experience as Erin does, but I didn't get a chance to show my favorite forgery that I uncovered is definitely this one, because it was just such a wow moment for me, and it was an accident that I stumbled across this. I've told this story a few times. This is the fragment of Nehemiah at the Museum of the Bible, and that little letter kind of at the end of the, you probably can't see my cursor at all. I don't think. Can you guys see my cursor?
It's
Probably not.
really tiny.
Oh, is it? Okay. Well, if I move it like this little letter
It's a little better.
at the end of the edge of the fragment here confounded everybody to the point where there were pages and pages of explanation about what was going on while we were editing this manuscript, and it frustrated me. And one day I was doing something completely different, and I did not have my copy of BHS at the office with me, so I walked upstairs to another professor at the University of Agder to see if I could borrow his, and because he's an older guy, he didn't even have one. He had like the old edition, the 1937 Biblia Hebraica Kittel. So I was thumbing through it, and I like almost passed the page where I saw up on the top of the page this passage, and I noticed the superscripted letter alpha here. It's a Greek letter, which corresponds to a like a Masoretic note in the text. And it just, because I've been looking at this fragment for like months at this point, everything just fell together, and I put them up side by side like this, I felt like I had just solved solved the Middle East peace crisis. So I like it was a big moment. And then when I actually presented this the first time at a conference, it was people were literally gasping in the audience, which is kind of every scholar's dream. I mean, I guess, unless they're gasping in horror, it could go a couple of ways, but yeah. So
I mean, it's my favorite too. There's a number of really just like intellectual, balletic displays of intellectual strength for figuring out problems of why this text could not be from the time. But this is just like the most compact, makes people think like, wait, what? This forger didn't even know Hebrew?
Yes, right,
That was a big clue.
right. It's a big clue. So, and it was an accident, which are fun. But Dr. Thompson, thank you so much for coming and joining us. Anything to say as we finished, or do you do you do media a fair bit? Do you have anything coming up, or anything you want people to be aware of as we shut things down?
I've put myself in book jail to try and finish this thing, so I haven't said yes to many things.
All right. So,
but I post upcoming stuff on my website, and I'm most active on Blue Sky if you want to follow along for my various about forgeries that I keep.
And for those who aren't following Dr. Thompson on Blue Sky, her stuff is really great on a regular basis. So definitely check that out. I should for us, Vishanti and I are going to be back on Dapper Dinosaur's channel on Saturday to continue slogging through Bodhi Hodge's terrible book about the Tower of Babel. So please come and check us out there. I probably won't be doing a stream next week, and that's because I'm going to be working polls for the federal election which is coming. But I will be back for sure on Wednesday, the 23rd of April for my birthday stream. So come and check that out. But there's some other stuff coming up in the near future. But I think I think that's it. Thanks everyone for coming out. Thank you for your questions. Thanks again, Erin, for being here. And
thank you. Always fun to geek out about forgery.
And come back, please, when the book is done. I'm super excited about that. So yeah, all right. Well, have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you later.